Welcome to The State of Us. Real people with honest opinions and the future of responsible media. Here's your host, Justin T. Weller.
Welcome and thank you for tuning in. Unemployment is down. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is north of 25,000, and millions of jobs are going unfilled. Sounds like a booming economy to me, but wait. Since 1973, American productivity has increased by 77%, while hourly pay has grown by only 12%. If the federal minimum wage tracked productivity, it would be more than $20 an hour. Not today's poverty wage of $7.25. That's as described by the New York Times Magazine. And it caught my attention today, and I thought, let's talk about this and break it down and look at what this statistic tells us and its historical presence. But of course, we can't begin this critical conversation without
your friendly redneck liberal, Lance Jackson.
It's an interesting concept I think we need to discuss. There's some, I think, other things, other ideas that need to be put in there as well. But I think it is obviously a major issue.
So
the minimum wage, I mean, not like we haven't talked about it at all.
Yeah.
Come up with a solution in the war to save America.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, we've spent a little bit of time.
It still is an interesting topic that is not getting much discussion.
I think the big thing too is some of the data, because a lot of the conversation centers around all these people's different ideas of, you know, what it needs to be. And I think we get lost in first establishing that there is a problem, because we've talked about before, right? The first step in solving any problem is acknowledging that there is one. And a lot of times I think we don't get everybody on the same page of acknowledging there's a problem. So why do you care about this? I mean, the fact that the economy is doing well, which I think we should say is a fact. I mean, the economy, right? Not the people necessarily, but the economy, it's doing well.
The economic numbers are good.
Yes. Yeah. There we go. That's nice and specific. The economic numbers are historically very positive. That said, though, what does that mean for middle-income Americans, poor Americans, and the like? And ultimately, obviously, I think hopefully the reasons you care are obvious, but it's your money. Whether or not you're poor or not shouldn't be really relevant. But maybe you figure out that, you know, what you're making in your job relative to inflation, somebody who was in your job 20 years ago or a similar job would have been making way more. Maybe that changes your expectations about how much you should be paid. So there's a lot of different approaches you can take, but it certainly affects the country as a whole. How well the people are doing always does. I mean, as a country, right?
Well, last quarter, didn't the GDP or the economy grew at 4.2%? And I don't know how many people got a 4.2% raise in the last 3 months.
Yeah. Wages, well, and I just saw a report. It was funny, right? When I came in, I saw a report that wages rose again for the third consecutive quarter. But again, and is that good that they're going up? Of course. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh, that's terrible that wages are going up. It's whether or not they're going up enough and whether or not there's a larger problem, which is part of what we really want to look at. So again, and I'm really hoping to stress this, because this is what, and I told Lance before the show, he can vouch for this. I mean, this is what sold me on, we got to do this. Since 1973, American productivity increased by 77%. Hourly pay grew by 12. I mean, we're not even like close to the same ballpark. Right. We're like at opposite ends here of the field. If the federal minimum wage was tracking productivity, which just as a person who owns a business, a lot of what comes to mind on am I happy with an employee is how good are they at doing their job? I mean, and maybe I'm weird. I guess if there's other employers out there who can say that that's not small business employers who say that that's part of how they value an employee or the main way, I guess I don't know how we're valuing them, but it would be more than $20 an hour if it was tracking productivity. And that's where you hear these stats cited. And this is what I think is missing from the conversation, Lance, is that, we hear our liberal news outlets out there talking about, the wealthiest 1% keeps getting wealthier and the poor keep getting poorer. But I don't feel like the connection's made to what we just read right there, which is our productivity as a society has drastically increased, and yet our pay has not. And that's where that discrepancy comes in, is why is that happening? And of course, if we had that answer, then we'd probably be in a different line of work and be super wealthy.
But we do have some answers.
We do. I mean, if we had the one thing we could say, that's it right there. And if we fix that,
but
then it's all good.
But it's not. It's a multi-tiered economy for a lot of different reasons. I mean,
Yes.
there are a lot of things that are different. Speaking as an older person, at least in this duo, I'm the older person. Things are different now than they were in 1973.
Yeah.
I mean, but
Really?
I mean, in the workplace,
Yes.
and the way people do business is totally different. I mean, there are the lack of labor unions. Labor unions were bigger
And their
in the
continued demise.
70s and slowly almost to the disappearing point now. Medical care is totally different. Insurance is totally different. The type of jobs have changed in America. There are more, white collar service jobs now than there are the blue collar factory jobs that tended to be union and more and higher pay. So there's a lot of things that have caused this. There's not just one, that the minimum wage has not gone up to meet production.
Just to speak to because I remembered this from the article, the kind of jobs have changed. Get this. I mean, this reinforced, I'd already decided I wanted to do it because this was down further in the article. And if you give it your all in a job, you can land with a high school diploma or less, right? So if you give it everything you've got, that job might not exist for very long. In fact, 50% of all new positions are eliminated within the first year.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, talk about jobs not existing. We're not talking about 1978 to now. I mean, we're talking about, if you get a job today, a new position, there's a 50% chance that in a year it will not exist.
If you have a high school diploma or less.
Right. And then we look at how it changes.
And they also point out too, excuse me, is that many of the big companies now hire out janitorial services or cleaning services. And so you're not even working for the company anymore, and so therefore there's a bid process that, okay, I have this 30-story office building with 5,000 offices, and hey, but you're working for Marriott or you're working for GE or whatever, and we have a standard and we're going to pay people good wages, even if because you're part of the company. We're all in this together, and you maybe even get profit sharing, and you maybe even get stocks, stock percentages in your paycheck because you work for GE, even if you are the janitor or even if you do empty waste baskets or whatever. But now they found that big companies have found it cheaper. Well, we're going to hire new made janitorial services. Well, there are 6 of those different companies in our fair city. And so they all make a bid. And in order to get the job, they bid so low that now they pay that person $8 an hour. Whereas because they're working for this janitorial service, instead of getting paid a decent wage by working for GE.
Yeah.
I mean, that whole thing is, to me, is one of the biggest differences between the 70s and 80s when I was growing up as a teenager and a young
all the outsourcing
student, is the outsourcing and how that has really kept wages down because these big companies would treat all their workers in much the same way. Now, obviously, the janitorial staff didn't make as much as the CEO, but many of the benefits were the same because you were an employee of that company.
Yeah. And
now we don't see that anymore. We hire these services out, these outsourcing, right? You're right with the proper term. But see, I didn't even know that term. I mean, I know that term now,
right?
But that didn't even exist. Nobody outsourced. You hired your own staff.
Right. Most of what a business needed was done by the business.
And you became part of the company. Mm-hmm. And everybody in the company, we had a big party and gave them a watch or a pen or whatever when the janitor of 40 years retired. And everybody said, hey, without Herb here, You know, most of you wouldn't have been able to do your job at 9 o'clock when you came in every morning because he was here all night making sure everything was ready to go when you walked in. And big thanks to him. And he's a big part of our success.
Yeah.
You know, and they were part of the work family. Now it's outsourced and you don't even see those people. You don't know those people and they're getting paid.
They come in at the dead of
minimum
night
wage.
and nobody sees them. And,
Right. And they're not getting to share
No.
in the profits of the company.
Yeah. And so that's definitely a part of it. I think, and in the nature of full disclosure, many growing companies, TrueChat included, see outsourcing as an incredibly effective way to keep costs low while growing.
And if you keep,
we used outsourced talent,
but
right?
but if you keep costs down, you're putting a damper on wages.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's just, that's a reality, folks. And I want to point that out because everybody says, well, look at the money I'm saving for my company, or look how this is making it cheaper to do business. It is, but that's also dampening wages.
Most companies' second biggest expense is only ever preceded by their people, you know?
Right.
Their people always being the biggest expense in most organizations. And so it's natural, right? As if you're the one who's responsible for the finances of the company and you're looking at where do we get money from? You know, how do we save money? You look at your biggest expenditure and say, is there a way to save? And I think so many of these companies look to that solution of, well, yeah, we don't know anything about janitoring, you know, being a janitor. So we're not going to hire one. We're just going to go pay somebody who that's all they do is janitor. The problem is, while obviously the benefit to that is that organizations do better, that in turn means that as a whole, society's not doing as well because, as Lance pointed out, these people who are in more of a janitor type position, if they want to rise to higher levels, it's non-existent because, again, they're an outsourced person. So it's not like, you know, they're going to say, well, you're learning from this person kind of here and there, and then this person gets to know you, and then they're going to recommend that, you know, you get this entry level job, and then you just work your way up. A lot of that goes away then. We don't have any janitors. We don't have, well, yeah, we do right here. The one talking.
Right.
But for big companies in particular, I think that point's well taken because we do hear about those stories from 20, 30 years ago or longer where it's, I was the janitor and I'm now the CFO, you know, or whatever.
Well, now here and the person within the article is a home healthcare person. And that's on the rise. I mean, you read about, oh, wow, you can get a job in home healthcare service. But it points out because of the different types of insurance that everybody carries, as a home healthcare person, you get paid based on their insurance, not on the service that you're providing.
Right.
So you may go in and bathe and change sheets in 3 houses. And in one house, you're going to get paid $16 an hour. In one house, you get paid $8 an hour. And in another house, you get paid $12 an hour for doing the same service because of the type of insurance and what their insurance company has negotiated with the home health care person. So you're up and down on what wages you make, and you're probably not paid when you're driving from client to client.
Yeah. So you're incurring a lot of cost to do your job that you're not even certain what your wage is, where I think, as this article points out, we're not going into a lot of the human component. But again, that's the cheapest way to provide home health care for the insurance company. Or I have, I have a family member who would tutor at-risk children through the state. Mm-hmm. And she was making like $16 an hour, but she was only working 10 hours a week because that's all the clients they had. Yeah. Or you make $16 an hour, but
that's great.
You can only work 10 hours.
But you're only work. I mean, right. And even if she
wanted home $160,
and she was willing to work more,
right?
But there weren't clients for her to work.
Doesn't dictate more work,
right?
And that's where I think the difference comes in between the small.
Those are things that are totally different.
Yeah.
In the workplace today than I ever faced as a worker.
I think the thing that people failed to realize my generation being part of it, and obviously some of them have, because there's a number of millennials, right, who own some of the world's most valuable companies. So some of them have figured it out, but obviously most of us are on that side of not remembering that when you work for somebody, take Uber for example, when you're a contractor, there's a reason the government legally defines you as having your own business, because that's what it is. If you're not provided benefits, if you're not provided, if somebody's not paying your taxes for you, you are becoming your own business. And the idea that everybody's well situated to do that, I think, is something else that we haven't recognized. And the interesting thing, though, is that Generation Z, which there's a couple names, as Lance and I discovered, which is the generation behind the millennials, they are much more averse to entrepreneurialism than millennials are. It was something like over half of all millennials were interested. That what they wanted was to own their own business. Now, whether or not they did, obviously that's not the case, but that's what many of them still want today is, get my own business, do my own thing, be my own boss. But for Gen Z, it's already that, picking up on the mistakes of the generation before you, it's only like 20 or 30%, which historically is much more close to the average of what generations, the percentage of them that want to be someone who has their own business.
But not to get sidetracked, because we're trying to talk about minimum wage.
Yeah.
So to get back there, no, you're right. And I'm the one who did it, but to help us get back on track. But I think, your question of what's causing this, there are a lot of different things that aren't tied to minimum wage. I think I'm not even so sure that fixing the minimum wage totally fixes the poor problem.
Sure.
Not that
it fixes.
It fixes it for
piece.
Right. It's a piece of the puzzle, and it totally needs to be fixed. I mean, I am totally on board with the $7, whatever it is, or $8 an hour that it is not good. Whether you do it like we've talked about regionally, which I saw another piece in an op-ed article that I think it was New York Times or Washington Post or Wall Street Journal, that you had available, where somebody took our idea and said minimum wage shouldn't be a federal law, it should be a regional.
Yes,
it's like,
we've talked about that.
We did that 5 years ago. Okay. But obviously there needs to be a change in the minimum wage. I totally agree with that. But I think we've got a bigger problem on our hand than that, with all of these other things that are okay with business. And you mentioned one with no benefits. That was the number one thing you look for when you got a job. When I was a 20-something like you are, is you didn't look at what the pay was.
What's it offer?
What's the health benefits you get?
Yeah.
When people talked about benefits, that's really what they were talking about.
And that's changed too.
What's the health insurance? What's the dental insurance? What's the eye insurance?
Now you want to know what does the office look like? Does it have a gym? Mm-hmm. Does it? And part of that shift comes back to, and hopefully what we're highlighting here in this little over 10 minutes we've spent on this portion of the nature of how things have so drastically changed, is that fundamentally means that we have to look at, not that those changes are wrong, but then we can't expect, that everything's just going to keep working right. A part of the reason we've arrived at now is this boom in startups and the way we think about work, and the notion that for most millennials, we don't have that mindset of, many of us don't envision retirement as an active part of our life. It's like, yeah, maybe someday way down the road, it could happen, but we don't look at it as an achievable goal with lots of life left to live.
Because you've been told as well that Social Security is not going to exist.
Right.
You're going to work and pay into it, but don't expect to get any of it.
Yeah.
I mean,
because somebody's going to take it away and then we're not going to get it.
I mean, your entire life, that's kind of been the talk, and we've had different presidents try different things to help millennials create some sort of retirement plan for themselves, which has been continually shot down by Congress, because Congress isn't ever going to stop Social Security, because old people vote
until the system
falls.
Right. Until it crumbles. And then you look at, okay, well, if they save it, but then spending on it skyrockets through the roof, which it's already starting to do.
Right.
That's only
But
sustainable.
that's another
for so
reason
long.
why
Yeah.
your generation looks at it and says, well, I'm never going to retire.
Yeah.
Because
this promise of there's going to be something there from the government, we're not trusting of. You know, they tell us that they're going to figure it out, but you see the partisanship and the arguing and it's like, well, I don't know. That doesn't seem, you guys can't get an annual budget done. How are you going to fix one of the largest social programs in the country? It can be done because obviously somebody came up with it, right? So we know it's possible, but it doesn't feel like it in today's age. Obviously, the reason that the State of Us talks about topics like this is because what we're trying to do here is shed light on the stories and the news items that we feel the mainstream media isn't paying enough attention to or isn't giving the right kind of attention to. And I think this is actually a little bit of both. I think it's one, they miss the boat on some of the really important stats that understanding that we've actually become more productive while proportionally our pay has decreased. What? This is just backwards. That's not the way you think of things working. And that's not the main story. The main story is look at the evil, wealthy people stealing all our money. And that's, again, it's like it's looking at a symptom, not
right.
And I'm not saying that the productivity thing is the cause. It's a symptom as well, but you can't look at the one symptom and say, oh, well, automatically then we know that this is the problem. We have to look at these multiple things. Or that
age-old concept and idea of which up until a few years ago I was guilty of. Well, if you want to make it, just work hard enough and you can get there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I was guilty of saying that, and pushing the idea of the American dream that, yeah, if you work hard enough, you can get somewhere. Well, if you read all the studies now, you can't.
Right. If you're born in the wrong place, the chances that you can get it are not even in the same ballpark as they used to be, And as Lance said, if the statistic is that, 10% can make it, well, then that means that 9 people can't. They're not going to. They're going to be stuck at that level, like the lady in this story is, where there's just they can never make enough to have enough time to do whatever they want to do to get themselves out of the rut. Because it goes to when you're living in that week to week, or in a lot of people's cases, that day to day, how you can't plan for things,
Right. Well, and I'd like to break down too a stereotype of, well, there's a lot of able-bodied poor people who could work who don't. Well, that's not true. I mean, folks, according to the Brookings Institute in 2016, all right, here's a breakdown of people who qualified as poor per the government definition. 33% were children who aren't even in the workforce. 11% were elderly who, probably shouldn't be in the workforce, or 24% were working aged adults, meaning they had a job, but they still qualified as being poor. 12% were disabled. 15% were either students or caregivers, meaning they were needed at home to take care of people.
What was that percent?
15%.
Okay.
3% were people who retired early, such as myself. Leaving, if you add that up, that's 98% of all poor. 2% of able-bodied working adults did not work. So the idea of, well, we just have to look at poor people and say, you're poor because you're lazy and unintelligent, which was said by a Fox News analyst, Bill O'Reilly, former Fox News analyst Bill O'Reilly, about 10 years ago. He said, we just have to look them in the eye and be honest with them and say, you're poor because you're lazy and unintelligent. Folks, that's 2% of poor people, according to the Brookings Institute in 2016.
We line up 100 poor people and 2 of them
fit that definition.
Right.
98% fall into a different category.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just, again, that's a stereotype that I think that I would like for this show to help to break down. That's not,
reasonable to say that.
Exactly.
It's factually, while what he said technically isn't true, it's incredibly misleading, because it's the idea that most of these people, or even more than most of these people, the vast majority of them, are poor because they're lazy, as opposed to, no, they're poor and they work their ass off to be poor. Right. Pardon my language. But
or the biggest group, and here's a topic for another day that I'd really like to talk about, the biggest group of poor people are children under the age of 18.
Yeah.
America, wake up. We're supposed to be this greatest country in the world, and the largest group of poor individuals in our country
are kids.
Are children.
Yeah. A third. Now, a third
that seems like that needs to be looked into.
Of the poor.
I'm sure there's not just one answer, just like there's not one answer to this topic. But I don't know
Something's
about
wrong.
you. I wasn't aware of that. And that's a sad state of affairs.
Yeah.
That we have to look the future generation in the eye and say, yeah, we're not going to provide for you.
Right.
One out of every 3 poor person is a person under the age of 18 who's trying to get an education.
Hey, everybody. Hopefully, I don't know if you got some goosebumps there, but it's the kind of thing that hopefully it gives you chills, gives you pause. I don't know what you want to call it, but it makes you think about the state of us, and the pun intended there, because that is what this show and a big part of what True Chat's trying to do, whose mission is to educate people by providing honest, open, and respectful conversations. We can't figure out the solutions to these really challenging problems if we can't start by setting aside our preconceptions to the extent that's possible and coming to the table and having an open conversation like Lance and I are doing today, where we're trying to figure it out kind of as we go, identifying these contributing factors, and then trying to look at, okay, well, if we know there's these multiple things, because so often it is, it's attractive for mainstream news outlets, liberal and conservative, to try to get it into this, 6-word thing that they can pop up on the screen, breaking news, XYZ. And sadly, most of the things, you can't just break it into that little itty bitty thing. We have to look at the whole picture if we want to fix it. And if you have ethical concerns, if you think there's a problem with what we're doing, or we're not holding that high standard like we should, you can email ethics@truechat.org. And we want you to get involved in the conversation. Lance and I aren't going to pretend that in 30 minutes we can, examine every angle of this. Hopefully we've examined some of the major angles, but we need your help, and you can do that by connecting with us on social media at TrueChatORG on Facebook and Twitter. So check that out. And with that,
and I appreciate everything you just said, but with that, with all of this, I guess I don't know. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm trying to point out, this is where the problems are. This is where the problems are, but it's not unsolvable. This is America. We're a great people and a great nation. And if we really, truly take the time to understand the problem,
we can fix it.
We can fix it. We can solve this. We don't have to have 33% of our poor people being children who are just trying to get an education and get started in life. We can take care of that if we understand that. And that's the point here, is we're just trying to get the information out. It's too easy to sit at work or in your nice car or in your sofa or love seat at home and kick back and say, yeah, I feel sorry for people that are poor, but they're just lazy. If they'd work harder, then that wouldn't be a problem. Folks, that's a myth. That's not true. And that's what we need to change. If we change that and get people to realize what's going on in these people's lives, we are the United States of America, and we can change this. It's not going to be easy, but if we understand what the problem is and not take the easy answer, like Justin pointed out, the news media wants to do on both sides, is just make the solution really easy, we can solve it. Because we face bigger problems than this. But we just have to all understand what the real problem is and not make that 6-word breaking news statement the problem.
Have to be committed to finding the answer instead of accepting whatever we're told is the answer. The article says, quote, "This imbalanced economy explains why America's poverty rate has remained consistent over the past several decades, even as per capita welfare spending has increased. It's not that safety net programs don't help. On the contrary, they actually lift millions of families above the poverty line every year. But one of the most effective anti-poverty solutions is a decent paying job. And those have become scarce for people like Vanessa. She was the subject of this article. Today, 41.7 million laborers, nearly a third of the American workforce, earn less than $12 an hour. And almost none of their employers offer health insurance. So if you get sick, you're hoping that what the government's got for you is going to work. That's if you have health insurance, because keep in mind, there's a lot of people who just don't have insurance at all,
who are working for $12 an hour and have to buy their own health insurance.
Yeah. So you go to the hospital and you're told, well, your deductible's $2,000 because that's the insurance plan you can afford, and you don't have $2,000, and you need a $50,000 surgery, to live. I mean, to just to keep going. What do you do? I mean, and then that's where you look at the perversion of the statistics that, poor people, because they're lazy, they turn to crime because it's too hard for them to get, money the way that the rest of us do. And it's, well, no, a lot of times they're poor. And we know that, the crime rate being higher amongst those who are poor is because they want to live. The majority of that data, which we've looked at before, as we talked about, are usually petty theft related things, like a guy stealing, bread from a gas station. That's, it's not the big drug lords that we conjure up in our minds of these people that are systematically trying to dismantle the system. They're trying to live, survive, which at our most basic level, I think is what we all try to do, especially if backed into a corner. So with that, we turn to the solution.
Just real quickly.
Yeah.
You said only a third were making $12 an hour. I think that was your percentage.
Yes, about
okay.
Are making less than $12 an hour. At
$12 an hour, which I've had former students when I retired 5 years ago, within the last 5 years when I retired, tell me, well, $12 an hour, I'd be okay. $12 an hour puts you basically at $25,000 a year, $24,960. For a family of four, that's 20% less than the poverty level. So if
and that's what the government says the poverty level is,
right?
And
that's the government standard.
Yeah.
Okay. For
which
a family
we've talked
of
about
four
the problem with that
is around $30,000, around between $29,000 and $30,000. So if you're making $12 an hour working full time, which I don't consider somebody working 40 hours a week being lazy, you still fall into the social welfare programs by 20%. So that means at 20%, to just get out of qualifying for social welfare programs, you'd have to make 20% increase on $12 is $2.40. So you have to be making $14 to $15 an hour.
That's that 15 number that we keep hearing.
To break the $15 an hour is what you have to earn in a full-time job without benefits just to hit the poverty level for a family of four in the United States.
Which, by the way, is who this article is talking about. It's a single mother with 3 kids. And then you wonder why we have a third of children.
But even if you were married
who are part of the poor
and had
people.
2 kids. Mm-hmm. I mean, my wife and I, we were married and had 2 children. One of us would have to work, or both of us would have to work full time for minimum wage.
Yeah.
And then who's taking care of our children? Which is where the
and then you get into
the number of
pay.
caregivers, 15% of all poor people fall into a category known as student or caregiver.
Yep.
Because what's the likelihood that you can both work full time at a minimum wage job?
Sadly, we don't have time. I mean, hopefully what we've shown
but
you
the solution,
yeah.
but quickly. I mean,
the start of the solution. I mean, I think hopefully the easy thing that this establishes is the easiest first step. Well, we've taken the first step on this show, at least. We've acknowledged that there's a series of problems, Say that fast. Because there's clearly a number of problems. One of the things, as the article points out, that is the most effective anti-poverty solutions is to get people a decent paying job. And we've got to raise the standards. Are wages going up? Yes. And will private business do some self-correcting on its own? Yes. But we have to bring it along, and we have to bring it along now, because if the situation keeps getting worse every day, it's that much harder to correct it. Every day, that's that many more businesses that will falter and fail when we do this. It's not going to be easy. People will get hurt in doing what we're suggesting by raising the minimum wage. There will be people who suffer. There will be less people who suffer. And that's the key. We proportionally help a lot more people by doing this. People who may have something wonderful to contribute if they could, but they're stuck. And we've got to do something about it. And I think, if you agree, Lance, we've taken the first step of acknowledging. The second step in this problem is fix the thing that's right in front of us, which is get the minimum wage up to at least $15 an hour. And ideally, as we've learned with the productivity, a lot higher than that. But we got to start somewhere.
We've got to break down the stereotypes about the poor.
Yeah. And
increase wages at the bottom.
Yep.
That's a start. That doesn't solve all the problems, but that's a start.
That's the beginning. And keep in mind, if people have more money in their pocket, it's more they can do for other people. It's more they can give back to their country in taxes, so on and so forth. I mean, the cycle isn't we just give these people more money. It's we're giving ourselves more money through a more productive, healthier society. If you want to take the what's in it for me approach, what's in it for you is an economy that's sustainable and a more devoted people to their country. People tend to not be very loyal if their life sucks. People don't love their employer who they make usually $8 an hour for unless they have benefits that offset that. And as we've learned, that's not the case.
Right.
So that's what we've got. Let us know your thoughts on the next steps. I'm sure we'll continue talking about this and hopefully come up with some other possible solutions. Of course, you can listen to True Chat podcasts now on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Stitcher Radio, along with pretty much any other place that podcasts are found. You can listen and let us know what you think of today's episode by going on social media and finding us at TrueChat.org, TrueChat.org on Twitter and Facebook. So take a look. For the State of Us on True Chat in Urbana, Ohio, I'm Justin T. Weller.
And I'm Lance Jackson.
Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next time on The State of Us. Be the change.
For responsible media, listen on demand to politics, sports, and more with the True Chat app or at TrueChat.org. Beyond the horizon, there is trustworthy media at True Chat.